Okay, everybody, let's talk about units. Extremely important in physics um, because units are what make numbers into something real. We do a lot of math in physics, but we're not just doing math. We're using mathematical techniques to analyze real world situations. So if you don't put units on your numbers, they don't mean anything. In a lot of cases, it means you're not going to get marks on your IB papers. So units, extremely important. And we're going to talk about the basics of units today. The first thing to know is that there are standard units known as SI units, or the System International des Unités, which are agreed upon by scientists all over the world. And there are lots of SI units, but you are expected to know as a physics student what are the fundamental units, meaning they can't be broken down into anything else more simple. These are just basic physical quantities that we measure. And I don't often recommend memorizing things, but this is something that you really just need to memorize. These are the SI base units. And especially you need to memorize these first five because we will see them a lot. And you will be expected to know that they are an SI fundamental unit. That's the meter, the kilogram, the second, the ampere, which measures electric current, and Kelvin, which is measurement of temperature. So you may get a question that will just ask you, is this an SI base unit? And if you haven't memorized them, you will really just be guessing. There are other SI units, which we call derived units, meaning they come from measuring fundamental quantities and then doing some math with them. For instance, if I had a square and I wanted to measure the area of that square, I would measure the length of one side in meters. That's a fundamental unit. And then I would do a calculation to find the area. I would multiply length times length. And when you do that calculation, you also calculate with the units. So if my unit of length is meters, and I multiply meters times meters, what I get is meters squared. So the unit for area is meters squared. And it is an SI unit, but it's derived because it's based on doing some math with a more fundamental unit. So anytime you see a unit in physics that is made up of a combination of multiple units, meters squared, meters per second, kilograms per meters cubed, you will know immediately that it is a derived unit. However, there are some derived units which might not look like this because physicists love to give derived units special names, especially if we use them often. For instance, one of the first units we'll talk about in physics class is the Newton. It's how you measure the amount of force, how strong a push or a pull is. This is a derived unit, and if you were doing the full mathematical calculation, you would see that a Newton is a kilogram meter per second squared. That's the full unit of newtons written out. But that's a lot to write, and it's certainly a lot to say. I don't want to say kilogram meters per second squared over and over again. So, in order to make life a little bit easier, there are derived units that have been given special names. Much easier to say newtons, 500 newtons rather than 500 kilogram meters per second squared. So you can't just assume anything with a name is a base unit. You need to memorize those 5 base units: meters, kilograms, seconds, amperes, and Kelvin. And the other thing you really need to know about units is metric prefixes. There are many of them. And you don't need to know them all by heart, but you should be familiar with some of them, the ones that we see a lot. And the ones that you really should memorize are mega, which means 10 to the 6th, kilo, meaning 10 to the 3rd power, milli, 10 to the minus 3, micro, 10 to the minus 6, and nano, 10 to the minus 9. You will often have problems where they give you units with these kinds of prefixes, and you will be expected to know how to deal with that numerically. And if you have memorized the SI units, it's just going to make your life a lot easier. So those are the things you will want to memorize, is the base units and the metric prefixes: mega, kilo, milli, micro, and nano.